America didn't run out of money in 1933. It ran out of something far more dangerous to lose: trust. By the winter of 1933, the Great Depression had hollowed the country from the inside out. Factories were silent, farms were failing, and a quarter of the nation was out of work. But beneath all of that, beneath the hunger, the joblessness, the desperation, there was a quieter crisis building inside every city. People no longer trusted their banks. It began with whispers. A neighbor withdrawing his savings just in case. A shopkeeper saying his bank looked unstable. A newspaper headline reminding the country of another bank failure. Then the whispers became lines. Long, anxious lines wrapping around blocks, men and women clutching passbooks, waiting hours in the cold, terrified their money would vanish if they moved. Then the lines became panic. Because in 1933, when a bank ran out of cash, it didn't close temporarily. It died. Depositors lost everything. Savings evaporated. Families went bankrupt overnight. And every time a single bank collapsed, trust in the other banks collapsed with it. Economists call this a run. But it wasn't a run. It was a stampede, a psychological wildfire traveling from town to town faster than any official could contain. Every withdrawal made the next withdrawal more likely. Every nervous customer made the next one afraid. Fear became self-fulfilling. By February, America was living in a financial ghost story. Banks that looked stable on Monday were insolvent by Friday. States declared bank holidays of their own. Governors ordered vaults sealed. Police guarded doors. Entire cities suddenly found themselves without access to cash, credit, or wages. The system wasn't breaking, it was unraveling. And in the middle of this chaos, the nation prepared to inaugurate a new president, a man who had not yet taken office, but was about to inherit a financial system on the brink of collapse. By the time Franklin D. Roosevelt raised his hand to take the oath of office on March 4, 1933, the American banking system had 1 week left, maybe less. There was no time for speeches, no time for committees, no time for debate. Trust had evaporated. Confidence was gone. The country was bleeding out. The banking system wasn't dying because it lacked money. It was dying because the public no longer believed it was alive. And in that moment, with the nation's veins closing and its economy suffocating, Roosevelt made the most radical decision in American financial history. He would stop the system completely in order to save it. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt took the oath of office on March 4, 1933, the United States wasn't waiting for leadership. It was begging for rescue. The country had fallen into a financial coma. Banks were collapsing faster than the government could count them. Entire states had already shut their banking systems to stop the bleeding. The nation was moments away from a total financial blackout. Roosevelt knew it. Congress knew it. And Wall Street, eerily silent, knew it too. So less than 24 hours after taking office, Roosevelt did something no American president had ever done. Something many believed no president should be allowed to do. He shut down every bank in the United States. All of them, at once. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Absolute, immediate, and unprecedented. On March 6, 1933, Roosevelt issued Proclamation 2039, declaring a national bank holiday. Within minutes, banks locked their doors. Vaults were sealed. ATMs didn't exist yet, but even if they had, they would have gone dark. The entire circulatory system of the U.S. economy, savings, payrolls, loans, withdrawals, froze. To the public, it felt like time stopped. But to Roosevelt, it was a race, because this wasn't just a shutdown. It was a reset. The banking system had become so saturated with fear that the only way to restart it was to halt the panic entirely, to break the psychological stampede by force. Roosevelt understood something that most economists of his time didn't. You can't save a collapsing system from inside its collapse. You have to pause it, step out, and rebuild it from the outside. Behind closed doors, Roosevelt and his team worked like surgeons, operating on a patient whose heart had already stopped. They drafted emergency banking legislation. They summoned Congress for an emergency session. They prepared new federal powers, the ability to inspect banks, reorganize them, support them, or shut them down permanently. And they did all of it in silence, while a nation waited outside locked doors, wondering whether their money still existed. Roosevelt wasn't just trying to save banks. He was trying to save belief, the thing the entire U.S. financial system was built on. The bank holiday was the first moment America understood Roosevelt's leadership style: bold, psychological, and utterly unwilling to negotiate with panic. He didn't come to calm the storm. He came to stop it, and then reshape the sky it came from. And for the first time in years, America felt something unfamiliar: a president who wasn't afraid. On the morning of March 6, 1933, Americans woke up to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the dangerous kind. Banks were closed, doors locked, vaults sealed, no withdrawals, no deposits, no paychecks, no credit, no cash. For the first time in American history, the financial heartbeat of the nation simply stopped. What had been a slow-motion collapse suddenly became a nationwide stillness. In New York, people walked to their usual branches only to find signs taped to the doors: closed by order of the president. In Detroit, police guarded bank entrances. In Chicago, businesses stared at empty registers. In small towns, farmers stood in disbelief. Their savings existed in theory, but not in their hands. This wasn't a partial shutdown. This wasn't a regional freeze. This was a country on pause. America had been living in fear for months, but now the fear sharpened into something else: uncertainty. Without access to money, every decision became a calculation. Could a shop stay open? Could a family buy food? Could a factory pay wages? Could a landlord collect rent? Economists later said the U.S. economy was like a lung unable to inhale. But in the moment, it felt like suffocation. And yet, something strange happened. The panic didn't escalate. It quieted. People didn't riot. They waited. Because Roosevelt hadn't simply shut down banks. He had taken ownership of the crisis. For the first time in the entire Depression, Americans felt the government was doing something bold. Not scrambling, not reacting, but acting with absolute authority. The bank holiday felt terrifying, but it also felt like a plan. Still, life during the shutdown was surreal. Businesses bartered, factories improvised, families stretched what little currency they had left. Merchants extended credit based on handshake trust because they had no choice. It was a week of suspended animation, a country holding its breath. Radios buzzed with rumors, newspapers filled with speculation. People gathered around kitchen tables whispering the same question: what happens when the holiday ends? Behind the scenes, the government was working non-stop. Inspectors moved like battlefield medics through bank ledgers. Washington rewired the system in secret. But to the public, the waiting felt eternal, a test of patience, a test of faith. America had shut down every bank. Now the only thing left to discover was whether it could reopen them. The nation stood frozen, caught between collapse and rebirth, waiting for Roosevelt's next move. While America waited outside locked bank doors, Washington turned into a command center. Behind sealed offices and guarded hallways, the U.S. government was attempting something no nation had ever done: rebuild an entire financial system in the middle of a shutdown. For 6 days, the country stood still. But inside the Treasury, nothing was still. Roosevelt's team worked like a crisis surgery unit. Lights stayed on through the night. Lawyers drafted emergency legislation at a pace that felt like combat. Banking experts pored over ledgers that looked less like balance sheets and more like autopsies. The challenge was enormous. The U.S. had almost 25,000 banks. Some were healthy. Some were hopeless. Most were somewhere in between, fragile, wounded, and drowning in fear. To reopen the system safely, the government needed to know which banks could survive and which were already dead. So they created a plan that would define American capitalism for the next century: inspect every bank, certify the strong, restructure the weak, and permanently close the doomed. It was triage, national triage. Federal examiners traveled across the country, turning bank vaults and account books into crime scenes. They inspected reserves, loan books, gold holdings, liquidity, the true condition that most banks had hidden from the public for years. And the truth was worse than anyone wanted to admit. Many banks had been insolvent long before the panic. Others depended entirely on public confidence, confidence now shattered. But Roosevelt's administration did not blink. Weak banks would not be protected. The system would not be propped up by illusion. If a bank couldn't survive daylight, it wouldn't survive at all. While examiners worked, Congress convened in an emergency session and passed the Emergency Banking Act, a sweeping law granting Roosevelt unprecedented power, the power to regulate banks, reorganize them, support them, rescue them, or shut them down permanently. This was not repair. This was reconstruction. And through all of it, the public heard nothing. No announcements, no confirmations, no explanations, just silence, the kind that amplifies every heartbeat. But Roosevelt knew what he was doing. If he announced the details too early, panic would return. If he hesitated, confidence would crumble again. The banking system wasn't being revived. It was being rebuilt, redesigned, reborn, brick by brick, ledger by ledger, law by law. And when the doors finally reopened, Americans wouldn't just find banks. They would find a new financial system, one shaped by secrecy, speed, and a president who understood that sometimes the only way to restore trust is to earn it behind closed doors. When the bank holiday finally ended, America braced itself. People lined up before dawn, streets filled with quiet crowds, radios buzzed, newspapers trembled in cold hands. No one knew what to expect when the doors reopened: salvation or confirmation of collapse. At 9 a.m. on March 13, 1933, the first major banks unlocked their doors. And then something extraordinary happened. People didn't rush in to withdraw their money. They rushed in to deposit it. It was the most improbable economic reversal in American history. After years of fear, after months of panic, after watching their savings evaporate, the public did something no economist dared predict. They trusted the system again. What changed? Not the numbers, not the reserves, not the gold in the vaults. Confidence changed. Roosevelt had spent the night before the reopening delivering one of the most famous radio addresses in history, his first fireside chat. Speaking calmly, plainly, and with total command, he explained what had happened, what the government had done, and why the system could be trusted again. It wasn't a speech. It was therapy. And it worked. The next morning, Americans walked into banks with a renewed sense of belief, not in the institutions, but in the leadership behind them. Banks that had been hemorrhaging cash for months suddenly saw deposits flow in faster than at any point in the previous 3 years. Teller windows that had once been battlegrounds were now quiet, steady, almost peaceful. The panic, which had taken years to grow, collapsed in a single day. Confidence became contagious in reverse. Each deposit reassured the next depositor. Each calm transaction steadied the next hand. Across the country, businesses reopened. Factories restarted production. Merchants extended credit again. Paychecks resumed. The economic pulse returned. It wasn't just financial. It was psychological. A reminder that systems built on trust can collapse when trust dies, and revive when trust is reborn. But the reopening also did something more subtle, more permanent. It proved the federal government now stood above the banks, not beside them. Before 1933, banks defined the system. After 1933, Washington did. The bank holiday didn't just fix a crisis, it created a new hierarchy, a new relationship between citizens, money, and the state. And in the moment those doors reopened, with crowds stepping forward in cautious hope, the United States witnessed something it had forgotten how to feel. Not prosperity, not certainty, but possibility. The country had come back from the edge, not through wealth, but through belief. When the bank doors reopened and the panic receded, most Americans thought the crisis had ended. What they didn't realize, at least not yet, was that the bank holiday wasn't just an emergency measure. It was a turning point, a reordering, a moment when American capitalism, quietly changed its shape. Before 1933, the banking system was a wild ecosystem. Thousands of independent banks, loosely regulated, deeply vulnerable, and fiercely local. Trust flowed bottom up. Communities trusted their banks. Banks trusted their ledgers. The government stayed mostly in the background. After 1933, that world was gone. Roosevelt's bank holiday didn't just stop a panic. It rewired the entire relationship between the American people and their financial system. For the first time, federal power rose above private capital. Washington became the guardian of trust, the referee, the final backstop. People no longer asked whether their bank was strong. They asked whether the government believed it was. That shift reshaped everything. The Emergency Banking Act gave Washington sweeping authority to inspect, approve, reorganize, and shut down banks. It born the FDIC, insurance that meant no depositor would ever again lose their savings to a bank failure. Overnight, bank deposits became as safe as the U.S. flag printed on the certificate. This wasn't just financial reform. It was a psychological revolution. For the first time in American history, ordinary people stopped fearing their savings. They stopped worrying that their money might dissolve overnight. And when fear disappeared, something else reappeared: ambition. People borrowed again. Businesses expanded again. Factories restarted again. Home loans grew. Mortgages multiplied. Consumer credit revived. The modern American economy, the one built on mass consumption, trust in banks, and widespread borrowing, could not have existed without that week-long shutdown in 1933. But there was a darker legacy, too. The bank holiday also marked the beginning of something subtle but permanent. The idea that when the system breaks, the government will intervene. That Washington will freeze the machine, reset it, and return it to life. The expectation that the federal government can, and should, step in during crisis would echo through every economic emergency that followed. 2008, 2009. Every bailout, every rescue, every intervention. They all trace back to the moment Roosevelt locked every vault in America and proved that sometimes the only way to save the system is to stop it. The bank holiday didn't just save the economy, it taught America a new rule. In capitalism, confidence is everything, and confidence now had a home in Washington.